After escaping from slavery, the Israelites come to Mount Sinai, where God teaches them how to live in community. The Ten Commandments proclaim that God alone is worthy of worship. Flowing from God, the life of the community flourishes when based on honesty, trust, fidelity, and respect for life, family, and property. A reading from Exodus 20, verses 1 through 17. God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work. You, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. Word of God, word of life. Thanks be to God. Words are all around us. We hear them, speak them, listen to them, read them, and we're impacted by them in ways that are conscious and subconscious. Now, for lots of us, the words impact us in more traditional ways, from traditional sources. Things like books and newspapers and news reports and subtitles and movies and shows. And it doesn't matter when we come into this world, the words of advertising affect us as well. Toddlers are targeted for kids' meals in fast food restaurants, and we adults are encouraged to buy things all over the place. And then, of course, there's social media and what all that means. Dominic Jackson, who is a professional marketing person and blogger, another new way to get words, has done a little bit of a study about how social media platforms use language, words, and the characters that meet them. And it's all about having the right amount of words to create the greatest impact. For example, in Facebook, you shouldn't have a title more than 5 words, and a description should be no longer than 18. Twitter, character length is about 153 is the preferred one, though they've extended it up into the 200s. But research says if you have a 100-character tweet, it'll be 17% more effective. Instagram, it's still at about the 150-character mark, but you need to limit yourself to 5 to 10 hashtags. LinkedIn, a professional site, says you could talk about yourself using 70 characters and a few more to talk about your business. Pinterest doesn't want you to use more than 160 characters, and YouTube hopes that the title of your submission is no more than 70. The amount of words and the way we use them matters. Now, I will tell you, when I write sermons, I am conscious of the number of words. They have these word count things. Now, when I do them this way, when I don't have a lot of notes, sometimes the numbers vary. But in particular, when I do weddings and funerals, I'm very aware of length, because in those emotionally charged moments, I think we human beings can only handle so much. Now, I will never get to the social media standard because frankly that's just too short, but I do pay attention. And I think there's a validity in trying to figure out whether you've said too little or too much. Think of the number of people in the news these days that are in trouble because they have misused their words. And then conversely, you have a poet like Amanda Gorman who reminds us of the blessing of language when her poems on the inauguration and the Super Bowl uplifted us. The first 3 weeks of Lent, I've been focusing on the Old Testament lessons and the covenants that God has made with God's people, starting back then that go through to now. The first week, it was about the covenant with Noah. Last week, we talked about the agreement between Abraham and Sarah. And this week, the covenant concerns Moses. And this covenant, like all the rest, is frankly a little bit more about God than it is about us. In other words, it's an awful lot about the nature of this God whom we believe in, trust, and put our faith in. And yes, our response is indeed important, but first and foremost, we need to understand who God is. I mention all of this because the way the Hebrews understand the Ten Commandments is they think of them as words. They are the 10 words, words to live by, words that help us. And that's the central part of the covenant. And I find that really very helpful. This idea that they're words as opposed to commandments. Because when we think of commandments, sometimes we use those like a club to hammer ourselves down or to beat down on other folks when we simply can't rise to the standards that we think we need to have to try and meet them. So, first point I'd like to make is, besides the fact that these are words, not just commandments, the most important thing happens before we get to the commandments. A little side teaching moment here. Different people number the commandments in different ways. Lutherans and others have our own way. And the way we do them, the first one is, you shall have no other gods before you. And then we end with the 2 covets. Don't covet your neighbor's wife and don't covet all their stuff. And when we do that, we miss the most important thing, which is what people call the prologue or the introduction to these 10 words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the house of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Or Peterson, the Message, translates it, I am God, your God, who brought you out of Egypt. And this is not just about placing these 10 commandments or words in context. This statement is everything. We begin, and these words are infused with the understanding that God is our God, yours and mine. The word your is singular. This is built on a relationship that God has established with us. That's how we understand these commandments. It's personal. And yes, it has an impact on how we live with one another, as we shall see. But first and foremost, we need to understand that this is our God, yours and mine, who wants to be in relationship with us. So if you remember nothing else from this entire sermon, remember that. And it's your God, yours and mine, not in a kind of possessive, exclusive, you and me God sense, but your God in a, I love you, my child, and I love you, all of my children, inclusive, broad sense. And it's because of this relationship God has made with us that then we are able to not have any other gods before us, not take the Lord's name in vain, and remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. If we have learned anything in this past year, we have learned that it is easy to take people and activities and our lives for granted. We have learned not to take our families for granted. Parents have learned not to take teachers for granted. Doctors, nurses, aides in a variety of settings are putting their lives on the line to help us. First responders do the same thing. Bank tellers and grocery clerks at their own risk from day one have been serving us, and it is so easy to take them for granted. And it is even easier to take God for granted, to forget that God is our God, that we are God's people, to forget whose we are. We lose sight of the divine action on our behalf, and we forget how significant God's love is in our life. God, who has claimed us in baptism and called us as children and empowers us to serve. These first 3 commandments, sometimes called the first table, address all of this, as they're primarily about the relationship we have with God and with one another. And then we get to commandments, the way we number them, 4 through 10. And these concern our relationships with one another. Now you take the 4th one, which is honor your father and mother, which is worded differently. And that's incredibly important. And we need to extend that to realize that not only do we honor our fathers and mothers, but we as parents and authority figures need to be people worthy of that honor. When I was researching this, the news broke of yet another U.S. gymnastics coach who violated the trust of his students and abused them. That commandment speaks directly to how we act as parents and authority figures in the lives of the children and others whom we relate with. And then we have commandments 5 through 10, which are a series of prohibitions. Don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't bear false witness, don't covet your neighbor's wife or house, don't covet all of your neighbor's stuff. And it's about how we live in relationship with one another. And these are important things. You could write a sermon on each one of these without any trouble. I read where homiletics, a preaching professor, told all of his students that they needed to preach on the 10 Commandments, every 2-3 years. And he suggested a 12-week series. They're that significant. But when you think about it, essentially, these second table of commandments, 4 through 10, deal with trust. They deal with how we respect one another and each other's stuff and how we care for each other. It's just as simple as that and as profoundly difficult as that. So we have these 2 tables of commandments. But Jesus, when asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Step back from that. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. You shall love God fully. Well, commandments 1 through 3. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Commandments 4 through 10. And then Jesus proceeded to then show us, to embody what it meant to teach us by the way he lived and the choices that he made, how you do this, how you love God fully, and how you treat your neighbor as yourself, with the fundamental thing being how you define who your neighbor is. It's not just the person that you know and are familiar and are comfortable with and you like. Your neighbor is the person you may not know or ever meet, and even the person who makes your blood boil. Look at what Jesus did to the folks that the society turned their backs against. Look at Jesus and what he said in the Sermon on the Mount. Loving your neighbor and loving God fully is a challenging thing. I don't know about you, but this understanding of the commandments as words to live by, in addition to, or as opposed to, but maybe in addition to 10 Commandments, I find really helpful just on I can get a handle on it level. But I also think it's important because it puts the commandments where they need to be. They're not carved on a tablet in front of a courthouse, but they're rather down in the flesh and blood, messy, awful, happy, challenging, frustrating, exhilarating, everyday choices we human beings make. It puts them right there. Jesus, in taking the 10 and saying they were 2, does not diminish them, but rather expands them by putting them into our lives where we use them and we need them. He takes them off 10 tablets of stone that were put in an Ark of the Covenant, and he puts them smack dab in our lives where we have to deal with them. And in that sense, I think it's a whole lot more relevant and helpful to the way I live my life. I'd like to conclude with a poem that I found called The 10 Words, and I think it speaks to what these commandments are all about. It's by Andrew King. This is a moment of new creation, blast of a trumpet and fire and smoke, and the people gathered at the foot of a mountain, Moses on the summit, receiving words. Words that are beacons, words that cast shadow, words that are fire sparks struck from stone, words that are trumpet calling to silence, words that will echo through ages to come, words that are the beating heart of a covenant, words of requirement, words that are gift, words that are bones in the body of a people, words that are blood flowing into their veins, words that are power spoken to weakness, words that are freedom because they are fence, words that challenge us, words that summon us, words that are song for a lifelong dance, words that are dwelling place, words of foundation, words that are law given in grace, words that are signposts, words that are journey, words that are a pathway pointing to peace. This is a moment of new creation, blast of a trumpet and fire and smoke. And we are the people at the foot of a mountain, and we have these words and our heart for their home. Amen.